Renewed violence by armed groups Boko Haram and ISIL has forced thousands of people to leave their homes in Nigeria. Despite repeated government pledges, the military has been unable to end the violence. So why is it continuing and what threats does it pose? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Thousands of people have been forced from their homes in northern Nigeria, fleeing an upsurge in violence by armed groups Boko Haram and ISIL. The cycle is the latest in a conflict that began in 2009 and which hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Many people from farming communities have been forced to flee their land, causing a humanitarian crisis along with the loss of farms and the food they produce. The violence comes despite repeated pledges from the state and the military to bring peace. That's a challenging task in a vast country, in a region where other armed groups are active and governments have competing interests. A new proposal from Nigeria's Defence Chief of Staff is to fence off the country's borders. So why is the violence on the rise? What is the impact and the government's strategy to deal with it? We'll discuss all this with our guests shortly, but first, this report from Amabote.
Returning home under military protection. Families that fled attacks by the armed group Boko Haram last month are hoping they can rebuild their lives. Fighters in Nigeria's Borno state have repeatedly carried out raids on the town of Mate, leaving thousands of people with little option but to seek safety elsewhere. The Nigerian government has been trying to contain Boko Haram for 16 years. The group says it's fighting Western influence and wants to impose its version of Islamic law. The conflict began in the northeastern state of Borno in 2009 with an armed rebellion against the Nigerian government. The group and its breakaway ISIL affiliate, Islamic State in West Africa Province, want to create an Islamic state that also includes parts of neighbouring Cameroon, Chad and Niger. But a new front has opened up in the northwest, where the Nigerian military is battling another IS-affiliated group in Zamfara state. Military campaigns have pushed back armed groups over recent years, but in the past few months, attacks have intensified, putting security forces under pressure. Nigeria's defence chief is calling for further measures.
Can we start thinking of fencing our borders? We have 1,500 kilometers with Niger Republic, 1,900 kilometers with Cameroon. Chad is there. All over us, surrounded by Francophone countries, and the Sahel is heating up. If we don't do anything, when the Sahel falls, it is Nigeria that everybody is interested in. Because they believe Nigeria is huge, Nigeria is big, Nigeria is rich. And that is what we should start thinking about.
Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu came to power 2 years ago, promising to strengthen security. But attacks by armed groups, kidnappings for ransom, and violence between herders and farmers have continued. The UN says thousands of people have been killed and at least 2 million have been forced from their homes during years of unrest. Those who've been displaced say they want their lives back and are looking to leaders to fulfill their promises. Amabote, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. In Abuja is Kabir Adamu, Managing Director at Beacon Security and Intelligence. In Abidjan is David Otto, Deputy Director of Counter-Terrorism Training at the International Academy for the Fight Against Terrorism. Also joining us in Abuja is Ovigwe Eguegu, a Peace and Security Policy Analyst at Development Reimagined. A very warm welcome to all of you. Kabir, I'll start with you in Abuja. Why are we seeing such an escalation in attacks this year by not just Boko Haram, but especially by Islamic State West Africa Province?
And thank you, Elizabeth. So a couple of factors, some of them internal and then others external. Let me start with the external one and what I would call transnational dynamics. In the neighboring countries to Nigeria, especially in the Sahel region, as you are aware, 3 countries have experienced military takeovers, and as such, they have changed their strategy. A significant number of them have moved soldiers from especially their border areas back into their city centers. So that has created vulnerabilities and gaps that allow movement of these groups crisscrossing borders, and most of them end up in Nigeria. Others, like Niger Republic, are now protecting their oil pipelines, which has been sustained attack over the period. That also has created a gap that is being exploited. In addition, the level of cooperation that had existed before now has reduced tremendously. The regional corporations, G5, is no longer in existence. Multinational Joint Task Force is divided. Niger has exited. Chad, at a point, indicated that it would exit that agreement. So the regional arrangements for counterterrorism has more or less collapsed, and that too has created gaps. And then the existence of several international players within the sub-region is also, tied somehow to the activities of these groups. Now, back to the internal issues, we're seeing more recently a kind of transformation, evolution, tactical evolution by these groups. So we're seeing more introduction of drones, unmanned aerial vehicles by them. We're also seeing improvement in the methodology of the usage of IEDs. Improvised explosive devices. We're also seeing adoption of night, fighting capabilities, especially night vision goggles and things like that. We're also seeing the usage of technology in communication and a few more capabilities using drones and other forms of technology. And then we're also seeing releases by the universal franchises, both Al-Qaeda and IS, that is encouraging more attacks by this group. Then, of course, there are several conflicts that the Nigerian military is involved in.
Of course, I do want to get to that. Yeah, I want to get to that, how overstretched the Nigerian military is a little bit later in the program, but you've raised so many important challenges that the Nigerian military is facing, and I want to bring David in on perhaps the second part of Kabir's answer, which is the great sophistication in attacks that we are seeing this year, whether it's the use of these advanced kinetic drones which neutralize and intercept other drones, or the very high quality propaganda videos that ISWAP produced for the first time in years. What are their tactics telling you, David, about where they are getting, how they're able to do this? Where are they getting their support from? Are they getting more support from the Islamic State core centralization, would you say?
Well, I think all this depends on the cell. Boko Haram / ISWAP, have been operating, as we know, in Nigeria for more than a decade. Some believe these affiliations go back as far as 2002, just after 9/11. So these groups do have a high level of external and internal connections. I mean, even the Nigerian authorities have at some point admitted that there has been evidence of internal support, and both internal and external support, from adversaries that want to destabilize Nigeria. But I think what is very critical is that one must take into consideration that each terrorist organization, if you're talking about Boko Haram and ISWAP, they do operate based on the dynamics of the environment. So we're talking about an age of technology, and this technology is not just available in the hands of the military. They are also ensuring that they're replicating the same tactics. So I think the highest challenge which the Nigerian authorities have faced, but not just the Nigerian authorities, but also regional bodies, as Dr. Kabir has illustrated, is there is a lack of some kind of an intelligence estimate of the threat that these groups face. So if you don't understand the motivational factors, that continuously motivate people to join these groups, despite the high level of casualties that these groups have faced, they still manage to get more people to join them. They still do have some level of ideological convincing, within the local areas where they operate. These groups, do have the capabilities. They steal arms, they get arms from external actors through serious organized crime. They still do target, soft and hard military and civilian targets. These groups are capable of, taking territory, holding this territory, and at some point controlling these territories. So it tells you that, the groups, i.e. ISWAP and Boko Haram, continuously adapt to the growing dynamics within the region, but also takes into consideration some of the challenges that states face, which Dr. Kabir has highlighted. They just take advantage.
And before we talk about if the military is adapting sufficiently to the advances that these groups are making, especially the technological advances that you have both, Kabir and David, laid out, let me bring Ovigwe in here. What impact is this having on the people in the region who have lived through now 16 years of an insurgency by Boko Haram?
Yeah, it has been a real psychological, social, and in many ways, emotional impact for these people over the years. And even if you look at the humanitarian aspect of it, for instance, if we look at food insecurity in Nigeria, Borno, Adamu, and Yobe State make up 15% of people facing food insecurity. And then you mentioned the Northwest also with ISWAP, where that's where they are strongest. In the Northwest, states like Zamfara and other states in the Northwest constitute about 17% of food insecure people in Nigeria. So we're almost at 40% of food security problems, coming out of this region. But why is that? It's because when you have these attacks, what that means, people can go to farms, and these are really not just farming communities. They are some of the most productive areas when it comes to agriculture in Nigeria. So people are denied livelihood. The nation is denied food security, and all what you have is a population that is not just angry, that is not just malnourished, but also one that doesn't really have any sense of hope that is being taken away from them, and that creates a breeding ground for even more people to be recruited into the ranks of Boko Haram and ISIL.
Yeah. Kabir, what Ovigwe is talking about are the multiple simultaneous challenges that are facing the Nigerian government and the military, which is now deployed across 2/3 of the country. What's needed for it to address these huge challenges, starting with what's happening with the armed groups, especially in the Northeast? It has a counterterrorism strategy. It has a policy on violent extremism. Is it implementing them?
So I think, and this is the major challenge. These policies exist, but there hasn't been any, I would say, evaluation of the level of implementation or compliance with the recommendations, as it were, contained in there. And so it's very unclear in terms of how the government has approached that implementation. And it's also significant to remind us that Nigeria is a federal system. So most of these policies are at the federal level. At the moment, we see a lot of variance between how the state subnationals implement or even understand these challenges, and then how they go about implementing the components of this policies. If we use Borno State as an example, which is the epicenter of the conflict, the governor came up with what he calls Borno model, which has been significantly successful. Till date, over 120,000 combatants, commanders, and members of both the Islamic State in West Africa province and the Jamaat al-Sunnah, otherwise called Boko Haram, have surrendered under this model. But then when you move to the other states, there are no similar models operating. So that's, I think, significant, that variance between what the federal government is doing and what the state government, and that needs to be closed. The other very important component is the inability to stop the funding generation capabilities of this group. They're still able to collect levies, taxes, and impose some form of Islamic levies, as it were, on residents within Borno State and the other locations. Secondly, they're still able to gather weapons, either from the Nigerian military or from across the border. Okay. And then, of course, they're still able to recruit new members. They're also still able to move around, both operationally. So until all of these are addressed, unfortunately, we're likely to see a continuation of the conflict.
Okay, so implementation of the good policies that are in place, but also the inability to cut financing to the groups remains a really big problem. David, let me bring you in on one of the other points that Kabir was making, which is, of course, their ability to continue to recruit people. We've mentioned the ISWAP propaganda video that they made that was recently released. Has the Nigerian government done enough to address the root causes? These videos are released in the hope of recruiting people that continue to join them. Has the government done enough to address the root causes, such as poverty, such as the lack of education and opportunities in this region?
Well, I think, the evidence of that is the continuous recruitment, by Boko Haram, using very young people that are quite desperate and vulnerable to these groups. I mean, it tells you that much has not been achieved in this domain in terms of preventing recruitment. I mean, we initiated, a program which was called Preventing Violent Extremism and Serious Organized Crime. And we saw that there are gaps, in terms of, preventive measures. And this, we're talking about, gaps in resilience building, gaps in actually, preventing young people from joining these groups. And this brings me to the point which, terrorist organizations always exploit. There is this element of trust and fear. So once the local population are unable to trust that they can be protected by either the government or the security agencies, they tend to drift towards fear. And, once they drift towards fear, it becomes evident that, the survival instinct kicks in and they do then shift, towards aligning themselves with these terrorist organizations. And this is why we continuously, despite efforts by the Nigerian authorities, we continuously see people, becoming members of this group. I mean, a lot of, Boko Haram fighters have surrendered, but there is no intelligence estimate as to how many are being recruited. Otherwise, we would have a clear idea in terms of what their numbers are.
David, why doesn't the government, is it really that difficult to have these estimates?
Well, it's very difficult because of the clandestine nature by which Boko Haram recruits, but also the fact that there are very, very vulnerable communities that sometimes as a matter of governance inefficiencies, some of these people can't be accounted for. I mean, there was a strategy, to remove most of these local villages that were deemed to be vulnerable to Boko Haram recruitment, to take them to other safe areas. But then that, created another issue in terms of, humanitarian needs. So it's very difficult. But I think what is quite key, in terms of, way forward and the government strategy, is that, as long as people do not feel that they can be protected by the state, by security agencies, there will always be, that gap which Boko Haram is going to join into and recruit more people within their ranks.
Yeah. And Ovigwe, can the Nigerian government and military deal with this issue on its own? There was a multinational joint task force to deal with it. Niger withdrew its troops, like we heard from Kabir earlier. And we've seen ISWAP attacks on the Cameroonian border recently that saw the killing of both Nigerian and Cameroonian soldiers. Does there need to be more international cooperation, once again, as we have seen in the past, between Nigeria and its neighbours?
Yes, of course. I think that really is the issue that needs to be addressed as you all should be aware, we've seen a deterioration in terms of political relationships in Lake Chad Basin countries and even in the wider Sahel because of issues around differences in governance, democratic countries putting pressure on those who are being run by junta. But there is a common challenge that whether you're a democracy or you're a military junta, that all of these countries face, and that is terrorism. So the fact that we are in a position where we're letting political differences really shape the security environment in a way that is detrimental to the state, I think it's an indictment on leadership in ECOWAS and all of these countries. Fundamentally, the role of the state is to provide security for its people, right? And even though there are political differences, that shouldn't be an impediment to that kind of cooperation. So where you have Niger, for instance, pulling out of the multinational joint task force, that shouldn't have been allowed to happen under any circumstance, because these are key critical issues. If we cannot see ourselves cooperating to solve this problem, then that leaves the field for these groups to exploit, and they are doing so, and they will continue to do so. I think countries in the region need to come together and really set up a real comprehensive and inclusive regional strategy. The G5 Sahel was a failure in many ways. It didn't even include Nigeria, for instance, right? So what we now need is a new regional security mechanism that includes all of the countries facing Boko Haram, facing ISWAP, and there should be baseline on what needs to happen regardless of political differences. I think if that is something that these countries move towards, then we'll be at a place where the armies can continue to build on interoperability and also make sure that they are launching operations and sharing intelligence that will prevent all this type of action from happening.
But Kabir, how likely is it that those countries will move towards that, given that there are, I think, 3 countries in the Sahel region that are currently being ruled by military juntas? Does the type of international cooperation that's needed to control, to get on top of the situation, not just in Nigeria, but along its borders, it's not there now, is it?
No, unfortunately, it isn't, and the dynamics does not suggest that it's something that would happen, pretty soon. The fact that especially the 3 countries were former colonial countries ruled by France, and the fact that Nigeria now has some very close relationship with France means that's not likely to happen in any time soon. The fact also that the accusation, especially coming from Niger, is that Nigeria has planned assassination attempts on the Nigerian president, suggests that he's not likely to, extend the handshake to the Nigerian government. So it doesn't look like in the near future, in the immediate future, that there would be such a cooperation, despite the fact that that's what we need at the moment. But we're also hoping that the military, especially the defense chiefs, who seem to be talking to each other, would convince the political players that this kind of defense pact is absolutely required between the countries in the region.
Okay, let me bring David in. Without that international cooperation in place, David, what can the Nigerian military alone do now to tackle this very great problem that's resurged in such a big way this year?
I think the initial challenge, Elizabeth, has been that the onus for defeating Boko Haram has always been laid on the shoulders of the Nigerian army. And this is, completely unhelpful in terms of, progress in counter-terrorism, especially when it comes to Boko Haram and ISIL. But I think, it should never, be a military approach. It shouldn't be in the shoulders of the Nigerian army. That is what has been predominantly. I think, we need to, try and reshape the way forward and look at more a whole society approach. Different agencies within the government, must be included. But from a Nigerian army point of view, I think they've done pretty well. And the reason why they haven't progressed from good to best, which is what is required to defeat Boko Haram, is because continuously, even the military itself mistakes that, this is a war that they can win, which is, completely, incorrect, from a city point of view. So I think what we need to look at is to see a much more interagency and multi-agency approach between the Nigerian military, the Nigerian police, the Nigerian communities. But just like my co-panelists have mentioned, we need to ensure that we remove away policy and politics away from operational challenges. And when I'm talking about operational challenges, I'm talking about the operational and tactical approach towards defeating groups like Boko Haram and ISIL that operate cross borders. This should be an exclusive engagement that should not, by any chance, have an impact in other political challenges. Each country has its sovereignty, whether it wants to be ruled by a junta or by a democratic state or by a dictator. That should not impede the war against terror, and this should be made very, very clear. Otherwise,
okay. We have David. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we only have about a minute left, and I would like to bring Ovigwe in here. Ovigwe, do you think that President Bola Tinubu's government, which wanted so much to focus on the economy, didn't it? Does it have what it takes to do what David and Kabir are saying is necessary to try and get on top of this?
Yes, I always believe Nigeria has what it takes to fight Boko Haram and even defeat and degrade it, because where we are today, we're actually, to a large extent, we made progress around 2015, 2016, and then we're seeing this resurgence again. So we've shown that it can be degraded significantly. And President Bola Ahmed Tinubu came with more focus on the economy. A lot of people at least saw him as someone who they want to work on the economy, as opposed to his predecessor, Muhammadu Buhari, who we saw as the guy who can do the security work, right? So maybe there's been too much of or some complacency, I should say, when it comes to the security component, as it focuses on the economy, which faces a lot of challenges like inflation. But look at food inflation, for instance. If people are not farming in the north because of Boko Haram and ISIL, and are not growing the food, then you're going to have a lot of problems solving food inflation. Then you have to import and burn through forest reserves. So these things are very much interdependent. You cannot think of economy without security and security without economics. I think Nigeria has the capacity to do that. It just needs to have that clear focus that includes all of its partners in the region in terms of operation, weapons, and intelligence, and we will be in a much better place going forward.
All right, that is our discussion for today. Thank you to all of our guests. That is Kabir Adamu in Abuja, David Otto in Abidjan, and Ovigwe Eguegu in Abuja. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.